Now, Britain's population is set to grow to 70 million by 2026. That's according to official estimates, 10 years sooner than expected. And 92% of the growth we're going to see all the way to 2036 is being put down to net immigration. Well, joining me now to discuss this is Gavin Rice. He's Director for Onward's Future of Conservatism project. He's also a former special advisor to Brexit Secretary. That was Steve Barclay back around 2019, 2020, rather crucial times, the heady days, eh? Gavin, thanks for joining us. Still with us is Benedict Spence as well. These figures are, I mean, they really are quite astonishing. They're astonishing and yet not surprising, given the numbers. Now, the Office for National Statistics put these figures out yesterday. It had been expected that sometime in the mid-2030s we would see our population rise from 67 million to 70 million. That's now going to happen by 2026. It's going to be 73.7 million by 2036. 92% of that due to more people coming to the country than leaving, rather than us all having babies. It's 6.5 million more people, which is the equivalent of 5 cities the size of Birmingham. Given that they've had to adjust these projections already, and given that their projections are based on a level of net immigration which is far lower than we currently have, and certainly in the last couple of years, it's touched 745,000, these projections are already skewed, aren't they? They're already probably wrong and underestimating how many people we'll have in the country.
Well, it's quite possible that that is the case. I mean, what we've actually found throughout this entire question of the net migration figures that we've had since we left the European Union is that every single time there have been a set of official projections about what we're likely to see, those figures have ended up being wrong. So initially it was
and always in the same direction.
That's right. So first of all, it was a post-pandemic spike, because obviously no one could really come here during 2020 to 2021. So we said it was just kind of pent-up demand. Then people said, well, it's an exceptional case because of Ukraine and the schemes that we had for Syria and Hong Kong. And I'm very supportive of those schemes. But what's clearly going on as more statistics come out, as projections are revised upwards, is that we realise actually it's not those one-off specific schemes.
Well, those have impacted the figures.
Of course
that doesn't account for all of it.
No, that's right. But what has clearly happened is that there is actually a problem with the fundamental migration system that was implemented after we left the European Union. Most people were voting for immigration rules to be tightened if they voted to leave the EU. There's good polling that suggests and supports that. But actually what we've found is a much more liberal migration regime with numbers double to treble what they were before we left the EU.
And again, I always found it absolutely fascinating that people who voted Brexit were called racist because they wanted to limit mass immigration from Europe. And now we've got mass immigration again, both perfectly legal. We're not talking about the people coming on the dinghies illegally. We're talking about mass immigration, absolutely legal, people given visas for them, their families to come and work, study here, or come with their families from across the world. And that raises other cultural implications as well. But let's talk first of all about the economics, because we've been told for years by the great and the good that mass immigration, or immigration, is good. It's a good thing. Now, we know that small levels of immigration is a good thing in terms of being able to pick and choose, the brightest and the best, bringing in key workers and the like. But we also now are seeing more and more evidence, and things that people like me have always suspected were true anyway, which is that actually bringing in millions and millions of people, often on very low-paid work, if at all, and their dependents, doesn't benefit the average Briton. It might be good if you own a business and you want cheap labour, and you want to have a mass big pool of people to hire from, and you don't mind the taxpayer picking up the bill for their housing benefit to pay their rent when you don't pay them enough to afford to live anywhere. That's just fine. But if you don't build houses, you don't build GP surgeries, train doctors, train teachers, build more schools, build more roads and parking spaces, you end up basically impacting on the homegrown nation more so. Do you think that anyone in the top echelons of government and the civil service and people and business, do any of them understand this?
I think they do. I mean, the question of whether immigration is good for the economy is the million-dollar question. And I think the question is for who and what do you measure? So does it increase the overall GDP figures? Yes, unsurprisingly, because you're adding more people to the country. Therefore, there's more people in work, there's more transactions. But it doesn't actually make us richer on a per person or per capita basis. So then the argument becomes, well, you're bringing in people with high skills who are high earners. The evidence suggests that's not what's been going on. The biggest growth in employed economic migration has actually been in care work, which is very low paid, often on the minimum wage.
The reason why they have to bring in people is because homegrown people won't do it.
Well, I mean, that's the argument that's often put forward. But actually, the Migration Advisory Committee, the official body that advises the government on this, suggested that if you increased pay per hour by just £1, then you could actually solve the labour shortage in the care sector. So it's kind of short-termism because we don't want to spend the money now. But actually, if someone's coming in to work on a very low wage, what ends up happening is you end up subsidising them in other ways because they consume more in benefits or services.
And again, that's the thing. We're always told, oh, but these people, they're working. So, okay, no, but you have to earn at least 40 grand a year to be a net contributor to this country.
Or thereabouts,
I mean, and most people don't earn that and never will earn that.
Well, that's right. And this is before you start thinking about infrastructure and housing. The UK has already got a 4 million house housing shortage. Now, we're not building at anything like the rate we would need to.
When they say we're building 200,000 houses a year, are those actually completed, well, homes, not houses, a lot of them are apartments, are those homes that are actually completed? Someone's literally got the keys, they're bringing their sofa in, or are they just homes that are started? But either way, most of those homes, we know, they're unaffordable apartments that, you know, 400 grand. Most people can't afford that.
Well, that's right. And, of course, one of the reasons they are so expensive is because demand for housing massively outstrips supply. You know, how the average house is now about, I think, 8, 9, 10 times the average salary. In the 1970s, when my parents were buying a house, it was about 3 times. So, I mean, at the end of the day, housing will become more expensive if you are increasing the population faster than you're building houses.
And we've seen that with rents as well. And a third of the population, those rents have gone sky high and, in fact, increasing. And poor old Benedict nodding away there as someone who's renting, wanting to save up to buy, and in that predicament. We'll come to you on that. Again, it's not just the economic side of things, you know, access to GPs, things. People say, oh, well, these people are working in the NHS. Well, not all of them are. A few, tens of thousands are. But also, by the way, we just choose not to train up enough people. We make a choice, a political choice, an economic choice, not to pay to train Brits already here in this country who want to be and have got the A-level grades to train to be nurses, to be doctors, and then we import people from other countries saying, well, we haven't got enough doctors and nurses. But it was a choice to do that. Now, again, then you might want to fill in the shortfall, but again, long term, that's not viable. And it's not what any other sensible country does in the first world. Let's talk about the cultural implications, though. It's the thing that everyone gets very wary about, but it is a very big impact. I'm very aware. I live in very multicultural, very diverse, very multi-ethnic London, and my daughter attends a school there, although a private school. Again, all of those things, very, very, very diverse. But the difference for middle classes is that when you are having people from many different countries come to live in this country, again, I think colour's completely irrelevant. I don't think most people in Britain think it's remotely relevant. We are a very, very welcoming country. The racial differences are, well, until people started talking about it constantly, we're just totally falling by the wayside for the vast majority of us. But when you have people come to this country, like, dealing with people who are, middle-class professionals who speak perfect English, who share the same values, share the same cultural beliefs, and as people largely do in this country, not an issue. Oh, and we've got some lovely delis and local restaurants. How lovely. And that's what a lot of middle-class people who make these decisions think. But actually, for the average working-class person, having people arrive who living next door, attending their local school, don't speak the language at all in many cases, particularly with women, whose children arrive at the school not speaking the language. My local school, the Ofsted report says 75% of children arrive not speaking English. Now, I'm sorry, that has an impact at the school gate. Community cohesion, not sharing some of the faith-based values of our country as a Christian heritage country in terms of tolerance, in terms of equality, in terms of individual freedom. When people arrive en masse in their hundreds of thousands from other countries where they don't share our values, our cultural, political norms, belief in democracy, things like that, there is an impact. But our politicians haven't wanted to talk about it, have they? Well,
I think most British people are tolerant people. I think, there is a good deal of support for a low level of immigration, provided it is sufficiently selective, and provided that there is a good positive story of social cohesion when people do come here. And I think it's entirely legitimate to raise some of those concerns about, especially things like language barriers, things like the pace of cultural change, if people are feeling as though their communities are changing in ways they haven't agreed to.
I don't like that word feeling. They're not feeling. Their local communities are changing.
Well, no,
when half the shop fronts in a local area aren't in English, the signs are in another language, whatever that language is Polish or Arabic or Urdu. That is a cultural change, and people aren't feeling it. They know it. I think it's sort of gaslighting people to say, well, you feel it. No, it is.
Well, I agree with you, absolutely. This is happening, but it's also something which is being picked up in opinion polling.
Yeah.
So 2 weeks ago, my organisation, Onward, published a report, Reality Check, which inquired into people's attitudes towards immigration. And what we actually found is over 70% of people thought it was too high. That was true across age brackets. So it's not only old people living in the provinces, that was young people as well. And we asked them the reasons. And yes, they talked about economics and housing, especially the younger voters, and the effect on pay. But they also talked about their communities changing around them, concerns about language. And actually, if you've got a school in an inner city or urban area where there's multiple first languages, it can actually be really difficult to manage that from a public services perspective. And it's understandable if people feel as though their own child is not getting the best education possible because of language barriers. I mean, you know, nobody's blaming people coming to this country seeking a better life. It's the policy that's the problem.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Again, want a better life for your family, absolutely. Although I would have thought if you want a better life for your family, learning the language of the country you've chosen to move to would be my number one
Couldn't
priority.
agree more. We should be more insistent about that.
We look at the MMR outbreak. Again, everyone was tiptoeing around this, not on my show. The MMR outbreak in Birmingham, they said it was largely among ethnic minority communities where the women not only didn't speak English, they were unable to read in their own native language, and therefore they were... So having leaflets about getting your kid MMR'd in the native language of a lot of these women from the Indian subcontinent was no use because they couldn't read that. Well, I'm sorry, but if we're going to have disease outbreaks because we're importing people who aren't educated and don't speak the language, I think that's worth talking about without people going, oh, I don't want anyone to think I'm a bad person. I think that's relevant. Benedict Spence, I know you want to come in. As one of those people hit by the high rents.
So many things, aspects to this that irritate and worry me. I mean, one big thing that stood out for me is that a third of one of the largest migrant populations in this country is people from Bangladesh, and over a third of them live in social housing. To which you have to say, I'm sorry, what if you're coming here to work and you're actually able to? What on earth are you doing in social? There shouldn't be a single one. As far as I'm aware, Bangladesh is not a place that we're taking mass amounts of refugees from. It's not at war with anybody. But, you know, on a similar thing, another part of the world where we take a lot of people from, India and Pakistan. We've seen earlier this year, last year, with the outbreak of hostilities between Israel and Hamas in Gaza, the depth of feeling that a lot of people of migrant backgrounds feel towards this. What happens in this country if a war breaks out between India and Pakistan? What happens, actually, if you've got millions, and it is millions of people, who suddenly find themselves diametrically opposed to another ethnic group that they live in the same country as? What do? Do they start fighting each other here? Do they start putting pressure on the British government to take a side?
We've already seen that with the pro-Palestinian movement and Jewish people. Again, something that people don't want to talk about. When people talk about the rise in anti-Semitism and the anti-Semitic attacks, who is doing that?
But there is one more.
We know who's doing it.
But there is one more thing that we need to bear in mind. Now, over the past couple of weeks, we've had lots of headlines in this country about how the armed forces aren't properly staffed and we may need to bring in conscription or whatever. Put that to one side. The main bulk of the workforce in this country is now being made up, or increasingly being made up, of people being imported into this country to do that. People of working age, fighting age. How many of them are going to stay in this country if we find ourselves at war with Russia? How many of those people are going to say, oh, yes, I'll absolutely sign up and die for the British Army? Or how many of them, many of whom will have said, oh, I'm a refugee, will find themselves on the first flight back home? At what point then do we then turn around and say, hang on, we haven't got a labour force anymore because they're fleeing?
I have a funny feeling that actually an awful lot of Brits, given our conversation about this last week, wouldn't fight either. Really interested to talk to both of you about this. I do stay to listen to what the callers are saying, though. Gavin Rice, thank you for that.